Her hands were trembling, not from fear of him, but from what she had just seen. Emma's fingers froze on the silk of Victor Caruso's tie, her knuckles barely an inch from the chest of the most dangerous man in New York City. She wasn't thinking about the gold cufflinks or the smell of his expensive cologne. She was thinking about the gun, the second gun, tucked beneath Rick's jacket, the one that wasn't there yesterday. Her mouth opened before her brain could stop it. Your driver's going to kill you today. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and join our family. Drop the name of the city you are watching from in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Emma Hayes had been waking up before the sun for 31 years. She didn't need an alarm. Her body had been trained by decades of early morning's cold floors, the particular silence of a city that hadn't yet decided to become itself for the day. By 5:15, she was already dressed. By 5:40, she was on the subway heading uptown. By 6:30, she was stepping off the private elevator on the 47th floor of the Caruso building, pressing her thumb to the biometric panel and beginning what the rest of the world would call an impossible job. Most people never even knew the penthouse existed. That was the point. Emma knew the rules. She had learned them the hard way in the first week when she'd made the mistake of looking directly at one of Victor's associates while he was on the phone. The man, a thick-necked enforcer named Sal, had grabbed her by the elbow and walked her into the kitchen, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. You don't see anything, he'd said. You don't hear anything, you clean the floors and you go home. You understand, Mom? She understood. 31 years of understanding. That was what Emma Hayes had built her survival on. But that Tuesday morning, the morning everything changed, Emma noticed something the moment she stepped off the elevator. The energy was wrong. She couldn't explain it scientifically. It wasn't a sound or a smell or anything she could point to. It was more like the atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted 2 degrees in a direction that had no name. Like walking into a room right after an argument has ended. The words are gone, but the heat is still in the walls. She set her supply caddy down in the utility closet, pulled on her gloves, and told herself she was imagining things. She was not imagining things. The first sign was the guards. There were usually 2 men stationed at the end of the main corridor, rotating shifts, radio earpieces, expressions like carved stone. That morning there were 3, and the third one, a younger man she didn't recognize with a jaw so tight it looked like it might crack, kept glancing toward the east wing, toward Victor's private study. Emma kept her head down and began her rounds. Dust the credenza, straighten the frames, replace the fresh flowers in the hall vase. She moved through the penthouse the way she always did, quiet, efficient, nearly invisible. She had perfected the art of being invisible. In a household like this one, invisibility was the only armor that actually worked. She was arranging white orchids in the foyer when she heard the voice. Victor Caruso's voice carried differently from other men's. It wasn't volume, he rarely raised it. It was weight. Every word he said seemed to carry the full force of consequence behind it, like each syllable understood what happened to people who didn't take him seriously. I don't want excuses, Marco. I want results. There's a difference. A pause. Then make sure it doesn't happen again. The line went dead. Emma didn't look up. She finished placing the last orchid stem, picked up her caddy, and moved toward the hallway. That's when she saw Rick. Rick Dolan had been Victor Caruso's personal driver for 11 years. In that time, Emma had exchanged perhaps 40 words with the man. He was not unfriendly, he was simply sealed. Professional in the way that people who have seen too much become professional. He arrived, he drove, he waited. He never fidgeted, never complained, never showed anything on his face that resembled a human feeling. But that morning, Rick was standing near the coat rack in the side vestibule, and he was fidgeting. His right hand kept moving, dropping to his jacket, resting against his rib cage, then pulling away. A small, unconscious gesture, the kind of thing most people would never catch. Emma caught it, because Emma had spent 31 years learning the body language of men who were dangerous, and she knew that the specific motion Rick was making, fingers dropping to the lower left side of the jacket just below the armpit, meant one thing. He was confirming that something was there, that he wasn't alone. She walked past him without breaking stride, turning into the main corridor toward the dining room. Her mind was already working. Rick always carried one weapon. Standard issue for a driver in Victor's organization, a licensed concealed carry, holstered on the right hip. Clean, efficient, practical. The motion she had just seen was not his right hip, it was his left ribs. A second weapon, hidden, unregistered. The kind you only bring when the first one is meant to be seen and the second one is meant to be used. Emma set a fresh set of napkins on the dining table and told herself very firmly that this was none of her business. She told herself that 3 more times in the next 4 minutes. It didn't work. By 8 o'clock, Victor was moving through his morning routine with the controlled precision of a man who had turned power into habit. He emerged from his private suite in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent, his silver hair combed back, his expression already locked into the mode she privately thought of as apex. He paused at the dining room threshold, scanning the table. "Where's the Barolo from last night?" he asked, not to anyone specific. "I put it back in the wine room, Mr. Caruso," Emma said. The temperature in the dining room was too warm for it overnight. Victor looked at her, a brief assessing look, the kind that made most people take an involuntary step backward. "Good, Wad," he said, "just that," and moved to his chair. She refilled his coffee. He made 2 calls. He ate half a plate of eggs and pushed the rest away with the impatience of a man whose mind was already 3 steps ahead of his body. Emma cleared the dishes and tried not to think about Rick. She failed. By 8:45, Victor was preparing to leave for a meeting she overheard downtown. 11 o'clock, the Meridian Group and the penthouse was shifting into departure mode. 2 of the guards had moved to the elevator bay. Marco, the chief of staff, was confirming details on his phone in rapid Italian. And Rick had brought the car around. Emma knew this because she heard Marco say it. "Car's downstairs. Rick's ready." Rick's ready. The words sat in Emma's chest like a stone. She was in the hallway collecting a lint brush from the supply closet when she made a decision that she would spend the rest of her life either thanking herself for or regretting. She was going to watch Rick more closely. Just watch. Just observe. Nothing more. That was what she told herself. Victor reappeared in the hallway at 8:52, jacket button cufflinks set, moving with the particular energy of a man about to conduct business that the rest of the world would never know about. He stopped just short of the main doors and turned to Marco. "The Falcone situation, is it handled?" Marco hesitated. "Almost." The temperature in the hallway dropped several degrees. "Marco, by tonight, sir, I give you my word." Victor studied him for a long moment, the way a chess player studies a board, not with anger, but with the cold calculation of someone who sees 14 moves ahead. "Tonight, Pete," he repeated. "Not tomorrow, tonight." "Yes, sir." Victor turned away, and that's when Emma stepped forward. It was instinct, pure muscle memory, the 31 years of professional reflex that overrode everything else. She saw the lapel of his jacket sitting wrong, slightly elevated on the left side, and without thinking, she moved in, reaching up to straighten it. "Excuse me, Mr. Caruso." He didn't flinch. He never flinched. He simply stopped and allowed her to make the small adjustment, standing with the patience of a man who accepted being tended to as his natural right. Emma's fingers moved to his tie. The knot had slipped very slightly to the right, and she centered it. Her eyes focused on the silk. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. She had trained them to be steady, and that was when she saw it. From this angle, this close facing him, looking past his shoulder toward the vestibule, she had a direct sight line to where Rick had reappeared. And Rick was watching Victor. Not the way a driver watches his employer, not with deference or neutral attention. He was watching him the way a man watches a target. Emma's fingers stopped moving. Her heart didn't stop, but it did something close, a sudden crashing skip that sent adrenaline flooding up through her chest and into her throat. She forced her hands to keep moving, kept her face completely blank. Keep moving. Finish the tie. Walk away. This is not your problem. But her eyes had already done the thing they were never supposed to do. They had dropped to Rick's left side, to the slight telling tension in the fabric of his jacket, where something hard and heavy was pressing against it from the inside. And in that same horrible crystalline moment, she registered something else. Rick's eyes had moved to her. He had seen her look. The silence between them, 3 seconds at most, was the loudest thing Emma had ever experienced in her life. It was the silence of 2 people who have just realized they know each other's secret. Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Emma Hayes, for the first time in 31 years of professional invisibility, made herself visible. "Your driver's going to kill you today." The words came out in a whisper, barely a breath, barely sound at all, pressed into the space between her lips and Victor Caruso's ear as she finished straightening the tie. She felt the change in him immediately. Not a flinch, not a gasp, nothing that dramatic. Just a molecular shift. A stillness so complete and so sudden that it was almost more frightening than any outward reaction could have been. For 2 full seconds, Victor Caruso did not move. Emma pulled back, smoothing the front of his jacket with hands that had absolutely no business being as steady as they were. She could feel Marco behind her, 3 feet away, holding his phone. She could feel the guards at the elevator. She could feel Rick in the vestibule watching. And she could feel Victor Caruso's eyes, the full, terrible, undivided weight of them now fixed on her face with an intensity she had never experienced from another human being. Not in 31 years. Not in any context. "Repeat that," he said. His voice was almost gentle. "He's carrying a second weapon," Emma said. Her voice was barely a whisper. She did not look toward the vestibule. She kept her eyes on Victor's lapel, her hands still making small, meaningless adjustments to fabric that was already perfect. "Left side rib holster. He confirmed it twice while I was in the hallway. That's not standard for a driver. And the way he's been watching you this morning, it's not," she paused, "it's not the way he usually watches you." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Victor Caruso said very quietly, "How long have you worked for me?" 31 years, Mr. Caruso." 31 years. He let the number sit in the air for a moment. "And in 31 years, have you ever come to me with something that wasn't true?" "No, sir." He looked at her for one more beat, that apex predator gaze, that 14 moves ahead calculation. And then, without raising his voice, without turning his head, without giving Rick or anyone else in that hallway so much as a flicker of warning, he reached into his pocket and lifted his phone to his ear. "Dante," he said, his voice perfectly casual, perfectly controlled. "Change of plans. I need you to meet me downstairs. Right now." He ended the call. He looked at Emma. And for the first time in 31 years, Victor Caruso, feared boss, apex predator, ruler of half the criminal empire of New York City, looked at Emma Hayes like she was something more than part of the furniture. "Good girl," he said. Then he turned away and walked toward the elevator, and Marco fell into step behind him without a word. And the guards moved into formation, and the whole terrible machine of Victor Caruso's world realigned itself around this new information, quietly, efficiently, lethally. And Emma stood in the hallway with her hand still resting against the front of a man's jacket that was no longer there. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. Her hands finally mercifully began to shake. She stood there for what felt like minutes but was probably 30 seconds. Then she did what she always did. What she had always done. What 31 years of survival had taught her to do. She picked up her caddy. She walked to the linen closet. She stood inside it in the dark with the door partially closed, and she breathed. In, out, in, out. You saw something. You said something. It's done. But even as she told herself that some part of her, the part that had been watching Rick's hands and reading the temperature of a room and tracking the subtlest shifts in a very dangerous household for 3 decades, knew that wasn't true. It wasn't done. It was in every way that mattered just beginning. Because here was the thing Emma hadn't said to Victor Caruso. The piece she had held back, not out of strategy, not out of calculation, but simply because the words had jammed in her throat and she hadn't been able to get them out in time. Rick wasn't acting alone. She knew that because of what she had heard 3 days ago in a hallway she wasn't supposed to be in, at a time she wasn't supposed to be there while retrieving a tablecloth she had left in a room that Victor used for private meetings. She had heard 2 voices. She had recognized one of them as Rick's. She had recognized the other one too. And the other voice, the one that had said very calmly, very clearly, "It has to be on Tuesday, when he leaves for the Meridian meeting." That's the window belonged to someone who was not Rick. Someone who was right now still in this building. Someone who had been standing 3 feet behind her in that hallway. Emma pressed her back against the linen closet shelf and stared at the darkness and understood with perfect terrible clarity that she had just warned Victor Caruso about the weapon his driver was carrying. But she had not yet told him who had put it there. Down in the garage, the elevator doors were opening, and somewhere in the building above a phone was ringing, a burner phone purchased in cash registered to no one, and the man whose pocket it was vibrating in looked down at the screen and saw the message, "He knows." The man read the message twice. Then he typed back 3 words: handle the maid. The linen closet was 3 feet wide and 4 feet deep, and Emma Hayes had been standing in it for 6 minutes, which was approximately 5 minutes and 50 seconds longer than she had ever stood in any closet in her life. She needed to move. She knew she needed to move. Standing still in a dark closet in the penthouse of a mafia boss after having just whispered a warning about an assassination attempt into that same mafia boss's ear was not a survival strategy. It was the opposite of one. But her legs weren't cooperating. Handle the maid. She didn't know about those 3 words yet. She didn't know that a burner phone had already vibrated, that a message had already been sent that somewhere in this building, maybe 2 floors down, maybe across the hall, maybe closer than she could stomach, thinking about a decision had already been made about her continued existence. What she knew was simpler and somehow worse. She had not told Victor everything. And now Victor was in a garage somewhere below, her surrounded by his men about to confront a driver who was carrying a hidden weapon, and he didn't know the full shape of the thing he was walking into. She pushed the closet door open and stepped back into the hallway. The penthouse had gone quiet in the way that large spaces go quiet when the person whose energy fills them has left. It was a different kind of silence from the silence of an empty room. It was a Victor Caruso-shaped absence, and it pressed against everything. Marco was gone. The guards from the elevator bay were gone. The third guard, the one she didn't recognize, the young one with the locked jaw, was still there at the far end of the corridor, his back to her. Emma walked toward the kitchen. She kept her pace even. She set her supply caddy on the counter. She turned on the faucet and ran cold water over her wrists, which was something her mother had taught her to do when the world got too loud inside her head. The other voice belonged to someone who was not Rick. She turned off the water. She needed to be very careful about what she did next. Not because she was brave. She was not brave. She had never been brave. Bravery was a luxury that people who had options could afford, but because she was practical. And the most practical thought she could locate right now underneath all the adrenaline and the fear was this: Victor Caruso did not yet know who had given Rick his orders. And if something went wrong in that garage, if the confrontation didn't go the way Victor planned, if Rick wasn't alone down there, if the person who had arranged all of this had also arranged a contingency, then Victor would have walked into half a trap. And Emma Hayes would be standing in a kitchen on the 47th floor, the only person in the building who held the other half of the information with a message she hadn't yet delivered. She dried her hands. She picked up the internal house phone mounted on the kitchen wall, the dedicated line that connected directly to Victor's security team, and she dialed the extension for the security desk. It rang 4 times. Nobody answered. She tried again. 4 more rings. Nothing. Emma set the phone back in its cradle and stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she thought, the security desk is always staffed. Always. In 31 years, I have never called that line and not had someone pick up within 2 rings. Her stomach dropped. She walked out of the kitchen back into the hallway and looked toward the guard at the end of the corridor. He had turned around. He was looking directly at her. And his hand, she noticed with the specific awful clarity of a woman who had spent 3 decades reading the body language of dangerous men, his hand was resting on the front of his jacket in exactly the same way Rick's had been. Left side. Rib holster. Emma didn't run. Running was the worst thing she could do. Running was confirmation, and confirmation in a place like this was a death sentence. She turned unhurried and walked back toward the utility wing. She was counting steps in her head. 12 steps to the utility corridor, 20 steps to the service elevator, 4 floors down to the loading bay, which connected to the parking structure, which connected to the street. She was on step 9 when she heard him start walking behind her. Not fast, not chasing, just following. The specific, deliberate pace of someone who is not in a hurry because they don't need to be. Because they already know where you're going. Emma reached the utility corridor and turned the corner. Out of his sightline, and then she ran. Not toward the service elevator. She'd already made a different calculation in the half second she'd had while turning the corner. The service elevator was mechanical. It could be stopped. The stairwell couldn't. She hit the stairwell door at full speed, caught it before it could slam, and took the stairs 2 at a time in complete silence. One hand on the railing, her soft-soled work shoes making almost no sound on the concrete. Behind her, she heard the stairwell door open. He was in the stairwell now. She was 4 floors down already. moving faster than she had moved in years, her breath controlled and tight, her mind running parallel calculations. How long before he calls ahead? Who is he calling? How many of them are already in the garage? And then beneath all of that, the one thought that had been building since she'd whispered those words into Victor Caruso's ear and watched his face change, the thought she'd been refusing to look at directly because it was so much larger than anything else. Marco had been standing right there. Marco, the chief of staff, the man who had been 3 feet behind her in that hallway when she'd adjusted Victor's tie, the man whose voice she had recognized 3 days ago in the room she wasn't supposed to be in, telling Rick that the window was on Tuesday when Victor left for the Meridian meeting. She hadn't told Victor that part. She had warned him about a gun, and she had left him without the name of the man who was now standing 3 feet behind Victor Caruso. She hit the parking level door and pushed through, and the sound changed concrete and exhaust, in the particular acoustics of a low-ceilinged underground structure, and she stopped, because she could hear voices, Victor's voice and Marco's voice, and the sound low and controlled and utterly unmistakable of a situation that had not yet exploded, but was holding itself together by a thread that was fraying with every passing second. Emma moved along the wall, staying low, staying quiet, 31 years of invisibility working in her favor for perhaps the first time in any context that actually mattered. She could see them. Victor with 2 of his men flanking him. Dante she recognized, the broad back of him, the height standing slightly to Victor's left. And Rick 10 feet in front of them, having stepped out of the car, his body language doing something complicated and terrible, a man who has been caught, who knows he's been caught but hasn't yet decided whether to surrender or accelerate. And Marco, standing just behind Victor's right shoulder, in exactly the position that a loyal chief of staff would stand, in exactly the position that gave him the clearest angle. Oh God, Emma thought. Oh God, Victor doesn't know. He thinks it's just Rick. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was not a shout. It was barely a call, but in the particular acoustics of that parking structure, it carried. Mr. Caruso. Every head turned. Victor looked at her. Rick looked at her. Dante looked at her. The 2 flanking guards looked at her. Marco looked at her. And in the specific quality of the way Marco looked at her, the way his eyes went very flat and very fast, like 2 lights switching off, Emma understood with complete certainty that she had just used up whatever remained of her margin for error. It's not just Rick, she said. Her voice was steadier than she deserved. She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. She was looking at Victor, and Victor was already looking at Marco. Not at her face, not at Rick, but at Marco, and the expression on Victor Caruso's face in that moment was something Emma had never seen on it before and never wanted to see again. It wasn't anger. It was older than anger. It was grief wearing anger's clothes, and underneath the grief was a cold so total, it made the air feel different. Marco, Victor said. Marco moved, not toward Victor. Sideways, 2 fast steps to his left, putting distance between himself and the flanking guards, his hand going to his jacket, and in the chaos of that half second, everything happened at once. Dante's arms shot out. Victor dropped, not in panic, but in the precise, trained response of a man who has survived more than one of these moments. The 2 guards moved in opposite directions. Rick, caught between his own conscience and whatever deal he'd made, hesitated for exactly 1 beat too long. Emma hit the concrete floor behind a support column, pressed herself flat, and covered her head with both arms. The sound that followed was not what she expected. There was no explosion of gunfire, no Hollywood crescendo. There was a grunt, a crash, the metallic clatter of something hitting the ground, a voice, Dante, saying something short and definitive in Italian, and then a silence that was completely different from all the silences that had preceded it. She raised her head. Marco was on the ground. Dante's knee was in his back. The gun that Marco had not quite managed to draw was 3 feet away on the concrete, and Dante's foot was on it, and Dante was looking at Victor with the expression of a man who has just done something he has done before and will do again without losing a night's sleep. Rick was standing with both hands raised, his face the color of old paper, his second weapon already removed. She could see it in the guard's hand, and his eyes were doing something Emma had never seen Rick's eyes do before, which was filled with tears. "I didn't have a choice," Rick said. His voice cracked on the second word. They have my daughter, Marco. He came to me 6 weeks ago. He said if I didn't. His voice broke completely. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. My daughter is 17 years old. The parking structure went very quiet. Victor Caruso straightened to his full height. He looked at Rick for a long time. He looked at Marco face down on the concrete, Dante's knee still planted, and then he looked across the space to where Emma Hayes was crouched behind a support column with both hands still braced against the floor. Get up, he said to her, not unkindly. Emma got up. Her knees were shaking. She didn't try to hide it. There was no point in hiding anything anymore. Come here, Victor said. She walked toward him. She was aware of every step. She was aware that her left shoe had come partially untied at some point during the stairwell sprint. She was aware that her hair had come loose from its usual neat arrangement and was sitting wrong on the side of her head. She was aware that she probably looked nothing like the composed, invisible professional who had adjusted this man's tie 40 minutes ago. She stopped in front of him. Up close, Victor Caruso looked different than he had in the penthouse. In the penthouse, he was architecture, immovable, perfect, designed for a specific impression. Down here, under the harsh lighting of a parking structure with his suit still impeccable, but his eyes carrying something raw that hadn't been there before, he looked like a man. An old man who had just discovered that someone he had trusted for 9 years had been laying the groundwork to end his life. You came back, he said. I didn't tell you everything, Mama said. I should have. I'm sorry. Why didn't you? She thought about that. The honest answer was because the words jammed. Because saying Marco out loud in that hallway with Marco 3 feet behind her felt like signing her own name to something. But the other honest answer, the deeper one, was something she hadn't fully admitted to herself until right now. Because I've spent 31 years making sure I don't get involved, she said. And I almost let that habit cost you your life. Victor looked at her for a long time. Then he said, my wife's name was Catherine. Did you know that? Emma blinked. Yes, sir. She died 9 years ago. Before she died, she told me the most dangerous thing about my world wasn't the enemies outside it. She said, and she used these exact words because Catherine was very precise. She said, Victor, the thing that will eventually get you is not the people who hate you. It's the people who pretend not to. He paused. I thought about that for 9 years and I still didn't see Marco. He said it without self-pity, just as a fact. The fact of a man recalibrating. You saw Rick, Emma said quietly. I saw Rick, he agreed. Oh, but you saw Marco. From the ground, Marco made a sound, something between a whir and a groan, and Dante pressed down slightly with his knee, and Marco went quiet. Mr. Caruso, Emma said. She kept her voice even. I need to know something. For my own, she paused. The man upstairs, the young guard I didn't recognize. He followed me into the stairwell. Victor turned his head and said 2 words to one of the flanking guards. The guard nodded and moved toward the stairwell entrance without another word. He works for Marco, Victor said. Not for me. He won't be a problem. Emma nodded. She wasn't sure she believed that last part, but she accepted it because there wasn't much else she could do. Rick, Victor said. He turned to the driver who was still standing with his hands at his sides and his face still carrying everything that face had apparently been carrying for 6 weeks. Your daughter's name. Rick looked up. Sir, her name and where she is. Rick told him, his voice barely held together doing it, but he told him. And Victor took out his phone, not the one he'd used to call Dante, a different one, and he made a call that lasted 45 seconds. And when it was over, he put the phone away and looked at Rick and said simply, she'll be home by tomorrow morning. Rick put both hands over his face. The sound he made was not something Emma was ever going to forget. She looked away, not because she was uncomfortable, but because some things deserve privacy, even in the middle of a parking garage in the bowels of a criminal empire. She looked at the far wall. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about her mother running cold water over her wrists and saying, Emma, the world is going to try very hard to make you stop feeling things. Don't let it. Don't let it. Victor's voice very close to her brought her back. Emma, she looked at him. You're not a housekeeper anymore. She absorbed that. She wasn't sure what it meant exactly, and the uncertainty of what it meant was in its own way as frightening as everything that had just happened, because she knew the shape of her old life, 31 years of it. She knew exactly where the edges were, exactly which lines not to cross, exactly how to be present and absent at the same time. The new thing Victor Caruso was offering her, the thing those 5 words implied, had no shape she recognized. What am I then, Aon Dimast? He looked at her the way he'd looked at her upstairs when she'd whispered her warning into the space beside his ear. That calculating 14 moves ahead look. But this time underneath it, there was something else. Something that might in another context on another man's face have been called respect. You're whatever I need you to be, he said. It was not by any reasonable measure a reassuring answer. But Emma Hayes looked at Victor Caruso standing in the parking garage of his empire, with a traitor face down on the concrete behind him, and she thought about the burner phone she didn't know was already sending messages, and the network she didn't know Marco had been building for 18 months, and the 3 other names on a list she didn't know existed, and she made a decision. The same kind of decision she'd made upstairs when her hands had stopped moving on his tie, and her mouth had opened before her brain could stop it. All right, she said, just that. But the word carried the full weight of 31 years of a woman who had kept her head down and had stayed invisible and had survived by never once allowing herself to become necessary and had in the space of a single Tuesday morning become the most necessary person in the room. From the ground, Marco lifted his head just far enough to look at her out of here. The look on his face was not the look of a defeated man. It was the look of a man who was already thinking about the next move. And Emma, who had spent 31 years reading rooms, read his face in 1 second flat and felt the specific bone-deep chill of understanding that this was not over. That what had just happened in this garage was not the end of something. It was the beginning. Marco Vitelli had been with Victor Caruso for 9 years, 4 months and 11 days. Emma knew this because she had filed his employment paperwork herself back when she was still doing administrative overflow for the household, before Victor had hired a dedicated staff coordinator and returned Emma to her original role. She remembered the date because it was the same week her mother had passed, and the paperwork had given her something to do with her hands during those first hollow days of grief. 9 years, 4 months, 11 days. She was thinking about that number as she rode the elevator back up to the penthouse, standing in the back corner of the car, hands folded in front of her, watching the floor numbers climb. Victor was somewhere below her, still managing the situation in the garage with the quiet surgical efficiency that she had observed from a safe distance for 3 decades. Dante had taken Marco. The guards had taken the young man from the stairwell. She had heard that much before Victor had told her very calmly to go back upstairs and wait. Wait, as if she were now a person who was told to wait rather than a person who was told to clean. The elevator doors opened and she stepped back into the penthouse hallway, and the first thing she did was stand completely still for 10 seconds and listen. Silence. Real silence, not the charged kind. Whatever had been coiled in the air that morning had released, or at least partially released, and the penthouse had settled into the particular quiet of a space where something enormous had just happened, and the walls were still absorbing it. She walked to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She sat at the small staff table in the corner, the one she had eaten lunch at alone approximately 3,000 times, and she put her face in her hands and stayed that way until the kettle began to whistle. She made tea. She didn't drink. She was still sitting at that table 20 minutes later when she heard the elevator. Victor came in through the main doors with Dante 2 steps behind him and one of the flanking guards taking up a position at the hallway entrance. He walked directly to the kitchen without pausing, pulled out the chair across from Emma with one hand and sat down. He was still in the charcoal suit. His cufflinks were still set. He looked on the outside almost exactly as he had when he'd walked out of his private suite at 8 o'clock that morning, but his eyes were different. "Tell me everything you heard," he said. "3 days ago, the room you weren't supposed to be in, every word." Emma wrapped both hands around her mug. The tablecloth was... I'd left it in the East reading room the night before after I'd repressed it for the Thursday dinner. I went back to collect it the next morning. The door was partially open. Go on. I heard Marco's voice first, then Rick's. Marco said, and I'm giving you his exact words, he said, "It has to be on Tuesday, when he leaves for the Meridian meeting." That's the window. And Rick said something I couldn't fully hear, something that sounded like a question. And then Marco said, "Don't ask questions. Just be ready. Everything is already in place." Victor didn't move. His expression didn't change. He was doing that thing he did, that internal processing. the 14 moves ahead calculation running somewhere behind his eyes while his face stayed perfectly neutral. Everything is already in place, he repeated. Yes. Those were his exact words. Yes, Mr. Caruso? Dante, standing by the doorway, made a small sound, not quite a word more, like the verbal equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Victor heard it. Say it, Dante. If everything was already in place, Dante said carefully, then Marco wasn't working alone either. Same way Rick wasn't working alone. The kitchen went very still. Emma had thought this too, sitting at the staff table with her face in her hands. She had thought it and then quickly tried to think about something else because the implications of it were large enough to swallow the entire morning. He had a list, Victor said. It wasn't a question. We found it on his phone, Dante said. Encrypted, but our guy cracked it in 15 minutes. 4 names, 4 targets in your organization. You were first. And the other 3, Dante paused, just half a second. The kind of pause that in 31 years of reading Dangerous Rooms, Emma had learned to translate precisely. It meant the answer is worse than you were expecting. Sal Greco, Tommy Rinaldi, and your son. The word son landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a very great height. Emma felt it hit. She watched it hit. Victor watched his face do the thing it did so rarely that she could count the times she'd seen it on one hand. It showed something. Not grief, not fear, not even anger. Something that lived underneath all of those. Something that only existed in fathers. Anthony, Victor said. His voice was level, completely level. But the name came out of somewhere that had nothing to do with the mafia boss or the apex predator or the man in the charcoal suit. It came from somewhere else entirely. He's in Boston, Dante said quickly. I called ahead 30 seconds after we read the list. Our people are already with him. He's safe, Victor. Right now, he's safe. Victor nodded once, a small controlled nod. Emma watched him take that information, take the fear behind it, and press it down into whatever compartment he kept those things in, and she thought not for the first time that there was something genuinely tragic about a man who was so skilled at containing himself that the people around him could never quite tell if he was human. Who else knew about Tuesday, Victor asked. That's what I need to figure out, Dante said. Marco ran a tight circle, but 4 targets means 4 different contractors, and that means communication, and communication means exposure, Victor said. Exposure. Victor looked at Emma. She became aware with a clarity that was almost physical that she was sitting in the Caruso kitchen at 9:47 in the morning being looked at by 2 men who were conducting what amounted to a war council as if her presence there was not only acceptable but necessary. You've been in this penthouse for 31 years, Victor said. Yes. You know who comes and goes? Most of them, yes. In the last month, anyone unusual, anyone who didn't fit the normal pattern. Emma thought. She did this the way she did everything methodically without rushing, pulling the details up in the order they had occurred. 3 weeks ago, there was a man I didn't recognize at the Thursday dinner. Medium height, dark jacket sat at the far end of the table. He only came once. Marco introduced him as a business associate from Chicago, but he didn't speak during dinner and he left before dessert. Chicago, Dante said. Something in his voice shifted. You know him? Victor said. Not a question. I know who he might be, Dante said. And if I'm right, he stopped. Started again. If I'm right, Victor, then Marco wasn't just selling you out to a competitor. He was selling you to the Falcone family. Emma had spent 31 years not knowing more than she needed to know about the internal politics of the Caruso organization. She had done this deliberately and successfully. But even she knew the Falcone name. Everyone in the city knew the Falcone name. It was the name that parents used when children asked why certain neighborhoods were the way they were. It was the name that showed up in newspaper headlines next to words like alleged and suspected and sources close to the investigation. It was also the name Victor had mentioned that morning before all of this began. The Falcone situation, is it handled? He'd asked Marco, and Marco had said, almost. Marco, Emma said carefully, told you this morning that the Falcone situation was almost handled. Both men looked at her. He said it to your face, she continued, while he was already running this, while Rick's gun was already loaded. The silence that followed had a very specific quality. She recognized it because she had heard it once before in her life at her mother's kitchen table the night before the doctors told them the diagnosis was terminal, when everyone in the room knew the truth but no one had said it yet. It was the silence of people standing on the near side of something irrevocable. Victor stood up, slowly with the deliberateness of a man who has decided something. He buttoned his jacket, a gesture that Emma had come to understand in 31 years, meant that the private Victor had stepped back inside and the public one had taken over. It was the same gesture whether he was about to take a phone call or about to make one of the decisions that appeared in federal case files. "Dante," he said, "find the man from Chicago." "Already working on it." "And Marco, I want to know every call he made in the last 60 days, every contact, every thread." "Done." "And Anthony." For just a moment, the jacket buttoning didn't fully work. The private Victor flickered back. "I want to talk to him. In an hour." "I'll set it up." Dante left the kitchen. Victor stood there for a moment, not looking at anything in particular, and Emma understood that he was doing what people do in the seconds after they have just processed information that rearranges the entire architecture of their world. She gave him those seconds. Then he looked at her and he said something she was not expecting. "Are you afraid?" Emma considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "Yes," she said, "but I was afraid this morning too, before any of this happened. I was afraid when I saw Rick's hand on his jacket. I was afraid when I opened my mouth. I think I've been afraid for 31 years, and I just got very good at working through it." Victor looked at her with that expression she was still learning how to read. "Most people in your position this morning would have looked away." "I almost did." "But you didn't." "No." He nodded. "Why foi?" Umma looked down at her tea, which had gone cold an hour ago. "Because I've spent 31 years believing that my job was to be invisible. And this morning I realized that invisibility has a cost. It means you also can't be counted. You can't matter." She paused. "I think I got tired of not mattering." Victor was quiet for a moment. "Then you've always mattered. I just didn't tell you." It was the simplest thing he'd said all morning, and somehow it was the hardest one for Emma to absorb. She pressed her lips together, looked at the table and nodded once, the same small controlled nod she'd watched him use in the elevator bay 10 minutes ago. She understood now why people use that nod. It was a way of accepting something without letting it undo you in public. She was still holding herself together when Dante reappeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was wrong, not alarmed. Dante's face didn't do alarmed. But it was tight in a way that it hadn't been 30 seconds ago, and his eyes went directly to Victor in the way eyes go when the information they're carrying is too urgent for preamble. "Marco made a call," Dante said. "Before we got to him in the garage. 30 seconds before. Burner to burner." "To who?" "We're still tracing, but..." Dante looked briefly at Emma, then back at Victor. "The message he sent before the call. We pulled it off the burner. 3 words." "What 3 words?" Emma already knew. She knew before Dante said them, the way you know the end of a sentence you have heard the beginning of in a dream. "Handle the maid," Dante said. The kitchen got very cold. Victor turned to look at Emma. She was already sitting straight, already very still, already running the calculation. The same calculation she'd been running since she stepped out of the linen closet, the one she'd been trying not to look at directly because it had a very uncomfortable answer. "Whoever he called," she said, "they know what I look like. They know I work here. And they know I warned you." "Yes," Victor said, "which means I can't go home." "No." She absorbed this. She thought about her apartment, the small, clean 2-bedroom in Queens that she had made into the most orderly, comfortable space she could manage on a housekeeper's salary over 31 years. The photographs on the bookshelf, her mother's rocking chair by the window, the orchid on the sill that she had kept alive for 4 years through nothing but stubbornness and the right watering schedule. She thought about all of that, and then she put it aside because there was a more immediate problem. "The call Marco made," she said. "If they were already positioned, if Marco had contingencies in place, then the person he called might already be moving." "That's correct," Dante said. "How long ago was the call?" 52 minutes. Emma looked at Victor. "Then they're not coming," she said. "They're already here." The word "here" had barely finished leaving her mouth when they heard it, a sound from the direction of the main corridor door, the specific heavy sound of something that was not furniture and not footsteps and not any of the normal sounds that a penthouse made at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. Dante was already moving. Victor's hand went to Emma's arm, not grabbing, not rough, but absolutely definitive, and he pulled her out of her chair and toward the back of the kitchen, toward the door that led to the staff corridor. "Move," he said. "Don't stop. Don't look back." "I know this building better than anyone," Emma said, and the steadiness in her own voice surprised her. "Better than your guards. Better than Dante. I know every exit, every stairwell, every room with a lock that actually holds." Victor looked at her. 2 seconds. "Then lead," he said. Emma Hayes, for the first time in 31 years, stepped in front of Victor Caruso, and she moved. She took them through the staff corridor at a pace that was just below a run, fast enough to matter, controlled enough to think. She took the turn toward the East Wing service passage, away from the main corridor, away from whatever sound had come from that direction. Her mind was mapping as she moved floor plan, exits, locked rooms, blind spots, the accumulated geography of 31 years pressed into something that finally had a use. Behind her, she could hear Victor's footsteps, even and controlled. She could hear him on his phone, 2 words very low, "East Wing," and then nothing else, because Victor Caruso did not waste words or breath. She stopped at a door near the end of the service passage. She reached into the pocket of her uniform, the right pocket where she kept her master key, and unlocked it. "In here," she said. Victor stepped through. She followed. She locked the door from the inside. They were in the records room, a small climate-controlled space where the household kept financial documents, staff files, maintenance records. One lock on the door, solid and deadbolt. No windows. One internal phone line connecting to the security desk, which she already knew was unstaffed, but which also connected to an external emergency line she had read about in the household manual, 14 years ago, and never once had cause to use. She crossed to the phone and lifted the receiver. "Who are you calling?" Victor asked. "The external emergency relay," Emma said. "It connects directly to a monitoring service. It was installed in 2009 after the building's main security system had a failure. It's hardwired separate from the primary network. Marco wouldn't have known to disable it." Victor stared at her. "It's in the household manual," Emma said. "Page 47. "I've never read the household manual," Victor said. "I know," Emma said. "I wrote it." She dialed. The line connected on the second ring, and Emma Hayes, housekeeper, 31 years of service, currently locked in a records room on the 47th floor of the Caruso building, with a mafia boss at her back and at least one armed contractor somewhere in the building above her, gave the address, gave the floor, gave the access code from page 47, and requested immediate assistance with the calm, clear diction of a woman who had spent her entire career doing difficult things without letting her voice shake. When she hung up, Victor was looking at her in a way she didn't have a category for yet. 7 minutes, she said. Maybe 8. And until then, Emma looked at the locked door. She looked at the phone. She looked at Victor Caruso, and she thought about the list Dante had found. 4 names, 4 targets. And the Falcone family behind all of it, and she thought about Marco's face in the parking garage, the look of a man already calculating his next move. Until then, she said, you tell me everything I need to know about the Falcone family. Victor blinked. For a fraction of a second, she saw genuine surprise on his face, the first time she had ever seen it there. Why? Because whoever Marco called is in this building, Emma said. And whoever that person is, they're going to find this room eventually. And when they do, I need to understand what we're in the middle of. Not the edges of it, the center. Victor looked at her for a long time. Outside the door, somewhere in the building, she thought she could hear footsteps. Sit down, Victor Caruso said. Emma sat down. And the most dangerous man in New York City began to tell the most invisible woman in his world the truth about the war she had just walked into the center of, as the footsteps outside got closer and the 7 minutes began to count down, and Marco Vitelli, face down on a parking garage floor, smiled slowly into the concrete with the patience of a man who knew that the most important piece he'd put in place hadn't moved yet. Victor Caruso was not a man who explained himself. Emma had observed this across 31 years with the precision of someone who had nothing else to do but observe. He did not justify his decisions. He did not narrate his reasoning. He gave instructions, and the instructions were followed, and the gap between what he knew and what the people around him knew was, she understood now, not carelessness. It was architecture. Deliberate. Structural. The gap was part of how he survived. Which was why what happened in the next 4 minutes was something Emma would carry with her for the rest of her life. He talked. Not in the way powerful men talk when they want to perform power. Not the weighted pauses and the careful omissions and the words selected for maximum effect. He talked the way a man talks when he has just looked death in the face and found standing beside it the one person in his immediate vicinity who has earned the right to the truth. The Falcone family, and he began, and his voice was low and even and completely without theater, has been trying to take this city for 11 years, not take it loudly, not the way it used to be done. They're smarter than that now. They take it from the inside. They find the people closest to you. They offer them things I can't not, money not usually because money I can match. They offer them exits. They say, help us, and when it's done, you walk away clean. New name, new city, new life. And Marco believed them, Emma said. Marco was 44 years old with a daughter in Naples he hadn't seen in 6 years and a gambling debt he'd been hiding from me for 3, Victor said. The Falcones didn't recruit Marco. They built him. Piece by piece, they found the debt first. Then they found the daughter. Then they waited until he was desperate enough to call what they were offering a gift instead of a trap. Emma sat with that. It is a trap. Of course it's a trap. No bitterness in it, just the flat certainty of a man who had seen this particular story before. No one walks away from the Falcones. Marco would have been useful to them for exactly as long as I was alive. The day I was gone, Marco would have been a loose end. Does Marco know that? Victor looked at her. He does now. Outside the records room door, the footsteps had gotten closer and then unpredictably stopped. Emma was tracking the silence with every part of her attention that wasn't focused on Victor's voice. The stillness on the other side of that door was not the stillness of someone who had passed by. It was the stillness of someone who was listening. She kept her face neutral and her voice at the same low even register. You said 4 names on the list. You, Sal, Tommy, and Anthony, those are your top 3 lieutenants and your son. That's not a hit. That's a decapitation. Yes. Which means whoever ordered it wasn't trying to take territory. They were trying to take everything. All at once. In my world, Victor said, when you remove the head of an organization completely, all leadership, all succession, what's left isn't chaos. It's a vacuum. And a vacuum in this city gets filled within 72 hours. By the Falcones. By whoever the Falcones have already positioned. He paused. And that's the part I don't know yet. That's the part Marco is going to tell me. The way he said going to tell me was very quiet and very final, and Emma did not ask what that process would look like. There were still limits to what she wanted to know. How many people in your organization could the Falcones have reached? She asked instead. Victor opened his mouth to answer, and the door handle moved. Not all the way, just enough, a fraction of a turn testing checking whether the lock was engaged. The kind of test a person makes when they don't want to announce themselves. Emma and Victor went completely still at the same moment, the same instinct, 2 people in the same small room, suddenly operating on nothing but animal awareness. Emma's eyes went to the door. Victor's hand went to his jacket. The handle released. Silence. Then footsteps again, moving away, this time retreating back down the service corridor, and Emma counted them until she couldn't hear them anymore, and then counted 10 more seconds of silence on top of that. He knows we're here, she said. He's not sure, Victor said. If he was sure, he wouldn't have walked away. He walked away to get backup. Probably. How long have we been in here? Victor checked his watch. 4 minutes, 20 seconds. So 2.5 minutes until the monitoring service responds. Emma stood up. We can't stay. The room is locked. The room is a box, Emma said, and the steadiness in her own voice still surprised her, still felt like something borrowed from a person braver than she was. 1 door, no windows. If he comes back with 2 people, the lock buys us 30 seconds and nothing else. Victor looked at her. You have another way out. It wasn't a question. He had already learned in the past hour that when Emma Hayes said we can't stay, she had already calculated what came next. There's a maintenance access panel in the back wall, Emma said, behind the filing cabinet on the left. It connects to the building's HVAC service corridor. I found it in 2014 when we had a water leak in the east wing and the maintenance crew needed internal access. It runs the length of the floor and exits into the north stairwell. Victor stared at her. And you know this because when you work in a building for 31 years, Emma said, already moving toward the filing cabinet, you learn where all the ways out are. She gripped the side of the cabinet, heavy but on wheels, the kind that maintenance staff need to move and pulled. It rolled with a low grinding resistance, and Victor was beside her immediately, adding his weight to hers, and between the two of them, it moved far enough to reveal the panel in the wall behind it, roughly 2 feet by 2 feet. Utility access not designed for people, but navigable if you were determined and not too large. Emma was not too large. Victor in his charcoal suit was going to find it considerably less comfortable. She looked at him. He looked at the panel. Some rapid private negotiation crossed his face, the kind that happened when a man who was accustomed to having a great deal of dignity was confronted with a situation that required setting most of it aside. After you, he said. Emma opened the panel and went through first. The service corridor on the other side was narrow, warm, and smelled of insulation and machine oil. She moved through it the way she moved through the penthouse, efficiently, without hesitation, her hands trailing the wall on her right to maintain orientation in the low light. Behind her, she could hear Victor quieter than she expected, moving with a controlled, compact economy that suggested this was not actually the most undignified situation he had ever been in, which told her something about the life he had lived. 40 feet, 50. The corridor bent left, and she followed it, counting paces in her head. Emma, his voice behind her, barely above a whisper. 20 more feet, she said, then we're at the north stairwell junction. That's not why I said your name. She kept moving. Then why a beat? You came back, in the garage. You came back when you didn't have to. She didn't answer immediately. She was counting steps. 18, 19, 20. Her hand found the edge of the junction, and she stopped. I had information you needed, she said. You could have left the building. You had the stairwell. You could have been on the street. Yes. But you came back. Yes. Why? Emma pushed out the junction panel open and looked out into the north stairwell, clear, empty, the way the stairwell always was at this hour on this side of the building. She turned back to look at Victor in the narrow space. Because you only had half the information, she said, and in the situation you were walking into, half wasn't enough. She paused. I couldn't live with that. I've spent 31 years being careful enough to survive. I think this morning I decided that surviving wasn't actually the whole point. Victor Caruso, crouched in a maintenance corridor in a charcoal suit that had probably cost $4,000, looked at her with an expression she still didn't have a full category for, but was beginning to understand. My wife would have liked you, he said. Emma felt something move in her chest, not sentimental or not only sentimental, but the particular ache of a compliment that arrives from exactly the right direction. Come on, she said quietly. We need to move. They came out into the north stairwell, and Emma pulled the panel shut behind them. Victor was already on his phone texting, not calling fast and precise, and she watched his thumbs move across the screen and thought about how strange it was to be standing here with this man, to have moved from 31 years of near invisibility to this in the space of a single morning. Dante is coming up the north stairwell from below, Victor said. 2 minutes. And the monitoring service? Already coordinated, Victor said. Dante saw them in the lobby. They're on their way up. Emma exhaled, the first full exhale she had taken in what felt like hours. The man who tested the door, Victor said. I need you to think. Did you see anyone this morning before the elevator during your rounds? Anyone you didn't recognize who might have been placed here before we came downstairs? Emma thought, methodically the way she always thought. She retraced her morning: the elevator, the orchids, the dining room, the hallway, the 3 guards, and stopped. The east wing, she said. When I first arrived, the 3rd guard kept looking toward the east wing. I noticed it, but I didn't. She stopped. The east wing has a service entrance on the sublevel. It connects to the building next door through the utility basement. Victor was already typing. If Marco's contractor came in through that entrance, Emma said, they were in the building before you even came downstairs. before Rick was in position, which means Rick was the distraction, Victor said. His voice had gone very flat. Rick was what we were supposed to find. The noise in the front while the real move happened in the back. The stairwell door below them opened. Dante's voice came up, clear. They moved down. Emma first, then Victor and Dante met them on the floor below, with two men she didn't recognize, but who moved with the specific trained efficiency of people whose job was to keep other people alive. The man from the corridor, Dante said, we have him. East Wing service entrance, like you said. He looked at Emma when he said, like you said, and there was something in that look, not quite surprise, not quite respect, something partway between the two. He wasn't alone. Two more. We have all three. In the East Wing access, how long had they been in the building? Victor asked. Best guess since last night. The stairwell went quiet. Since last night, Victor repeated. Marco planned for contingencies, Dante said. If the primary move Rick failed for any reason, the secondary team was already in place. They just needed the signal. Handle the Maid, Emma said. Both men looked at her. That was the signal, she said. Marco's three-word message wasn't just about me. It was the activation code. It told the secondary team that the primary move had been compromised and to execute whatever they were there to execute. She paused. Which means me finding out about Rick didn't just save your life this morning. It also triggered the contingency. The full shape of it settled over all three of them simultaneously. The horrible interlocking elegance of Marco's plan, the way each piece had been positioned to cover the failure of every other piece, and the way Emma's single act of speaking had simultaneously prevented one catastrophe and activated another. If you hadn't warned me, Victor said slowly, Rick would have killed me in the garage, clean, no secondary team needed, no contingency activated, no exposure. Yes, Emma said, but because you warned me, the whole thing accelerated. Marco panicked and sent the signal, which brought the secondary team out of position before they were ready. She looked at him. If they had stayed in place until tonight, until you were less protected, less alert, they would have had a much better chance, Victor finished. Dante nodded slowly. Emma's warning didn't just save you this morning. It forced Marco's hand 12 hours early, before the other targets were in position. Before, he stopped. Before what? Victor said. Dante looked at him. Before Anthony left Boston. Victor's face went very still. Anthony was supposed to travel today, Dante said carefully. He called me this morning before any of this started to say he was coming down to the city tonight for a dinner. I told him to stay put when we found the list, but if he had come, he would have been in the city tonight, Victor said, when the secondary team was supposed to activate. Yes. The thing that moved across Victor Caruso's face in that moment was something Emma had never expected to see on it, and the unexpectedness of it hit her harder than almost anything else in the entire morning. His eyes closed for just 2 seconds. His jaw tightened and then released. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet, barely almost invisible, but Emma was standing close enough to see it, and she saw it, and she understood without any need for explanation that underneath the empire and the power in the $4,000 suit was a father who had just fully understood how close he had come to receiving the worst possible phone call. Emma, Victor said. His voice was completely steady. My son is 26 years old. He doesn't know anything about this life by my design. I made sure of that. His mother made sure of that. He stopped. He was going to be at that dinner tonight for one reason. What reason? Maha asked. My birthday, Victor said. He was coming to have dinner with me for my birthday. The stairwell was absolutely silent. Emma Hayes stood in it and felt the full weight of the morning press down on her. All at once, not the fear, not the adrenaline, not the calculations and the maintenance corridors and the locked rooms, but the simple, enormous human fact of it. A father, a son, a birthday dinner, and a plan built over months with terrible patience designed to make sure neither of them ever saw it happen. He's safe, she said. He's safe right now. Yes, Victor said, because you adjusted my tie. The 3 words landed with a weight that had nothing to do with silk and everything to do with the 31 years of invisible, careful, essential work that had made Emma Hayes the kind of woman who noticed a second gun and found the courage to open her mouth. Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Monitoring team is on the floor. Building is secure. Marco, Victor said, his voice shifting back into that other register, the one that lived underneath the father colder and far older. Where is he now? Secure location, waiting. Good. Victor straightened his jacket. I need to talk to him. Victor. Not like that, Victor said. And then, surprising Emma completely, he glanced at her. I need to know what he told the Falcones about my organization, about my son, about how much they know. He paused. I need information, Dante, not closure. Dante nodded slowly. And after, Emma asked, and she wasn't sure why she asked. It wasn't sure it was her place to ask it, except that the last 3 hours had apparently dissolved whatever remained of the boundary between her place and everything else. Victor looked at her steadily. After he said, I call my son, and I tell him dinner is still on. And he will come down from Boston, and we will sit at my table and eat, and he will tell me about his work and his life, and I will listen to every word. He said it the way he said the things that were settled. Final. Not a plan, a declaration. And the Falcones, Dante said. The Falcones, Victor said, made this very personal. He started moving down the stairwell. That was their mistake. Emma followed him and Dante followed her, and as they descended, she became aware of something shifting in her own chest. Not the fear which had been her constant companion all morning, but something running underneath the fear, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose, not the purpose of keeping a penthouse clean or orchids alive or linen pressed. Something older and simpler than that. The purpose of a person who has discovered late in the game, but not too late, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. She was thinking about that when Victor stopped on the landing below and turned. Emma, he said, when this is over, and it will be over, I'm going to need someone in my organization who understands the difference between what's visible and what's real. He held her gaze. Someone who has spent 31 years learning to read a room. I'm a housekeeper, Emma said. She were, Victor said. Past tense. She looked at him. She thought about her apartment in Queens, which she couldn't go back to tonight. She thought about the orchid on the sill, which would need watering in 2 days. She thought about her mother's rocking chair and the photographs on the bookshelf and the 31 years of a life built on the reliable safety of being overlooked. And she thought about Marco's face on the parking garage floor, that slow, patient smile pressed into the concrete, and she understood that the man who had spent 9 months building a plan to decapitate Victor Caruso's entire organization had not, in all his careful planning, accounted for a 62-year-old housekeeper who noticed things. He had not put her on his list, not because she wasn't dangerous, because he had made the same mistake that everyone made. He had looked right at her and seen furniture. All right, Emma Hayes said for the second time that morning. And this time when she said it, she meant something entirely different. She meant it the way you mean something when you have stopped surviving and started deciding. She meant it with the full weight of 31 years of invisibility finally, deliberately, permanently set aside. Below them, the building hummed with the sound of men doing the work that Victor's world required. Above them, the penthouse sat quiet and reset the orchids still in their vase, the linen still pressed, the whole careful architecture of an ordinary morning still in place, except that nothing was ordinary anymore, and nothing would be again. And somewhere across the city, in a car headed nowhere good, a man with a burner phone received a message that said, "All 3 down, she's with him." He read it twice. Then he made a call. And when the line connected, he said 3 words that had nothing to do with Emma Hayes and everything to do with what came after his. The lawyer's name was Gerald Fitch. Emma had seen him exactly twice in 31 years. Once at a Christmas function 6 years ago, standing near the bar with a glass of something amber, talking to no one. And once about 18 months ago, walking out of Victor's private study with a briefcase and an expression so carefully neutral, it had registered in her mind the way unusual things always registered, quietly filed away, not yet useful. Gerald Fitch was 61 years old, Yale educated, and had been the Caruso organization's legal counsel for 14 years. He was the kind of man who existed in the negative space of powerful rooms, always present, never prominent, the person whose name appeared on documents but never in headlines. He had, as far as anyone in Victor's world knew, never once crossed a line. Emma thought about that word. Never. She had believed it about herself once, too. She was sitting in Victor's private study on the 47th floor, Not cleaning it, not arranging anything in it, but sitting in it in a chair across from Victor's desk, while Dante stood by the window on his phone, and Victor sat behind the desk with Marco's decrypted file open on his laptop when Dante said the name out loud. Fitch, Dante said and lowered his phone. The car that picked up our third contractor from the East Wing service entrance last month, the one that brought him in for the walkthrough, it's registered to a shell company. The shell company's registered agent is Gerald Fitch. Victor did not look up from the laptop immediately. He finished reading whatever he was reading. Then he closed the laptop very slowly and then looked up. Gerald, he said. The word came out stripped of everything except the cold fact of it. 14 years, Dante said. 14 years. Victor agreed. Emma sat very still. She was beginning to understand that the morning's events were not a single betrayal with a clean edge, but something more like a fracture that, once you started tracing it, kept branching. Marco to Rick, Marco to the secondary team, Marco to Gerald Fitch, and Fitch to wherever Fitch connected, which was almost certainly back to the Falcone family, through a route that had been carefully constructed to look like nothing at all. Where is he now? Victor asked. His office, Dante said. Downtown, 32nd floor. He came in at 8 this morning, same as every Tuesday. Does he know that we have Marco? Probably not yet. That something went wrong? Possibly. Marco's signal was 3 words on a burner, Dante said. Fitch would have been waiting for a different kind of confirmation. What kind? Emma asked. Both men looked at her. She had been doing that, asking questions that apparently other people in these rooms didn't ask either, because they already knew the answers or because they had been conditioned not to push. She was still learning which category applied when. A news alert, Dante said. Something public, an accident, a medical event, something that could be reported without raising immediate suspicion. So Fitch has been checking his phone all morning, Emma said, waiting for a headline that hasn't come, which means by now he's not just waiting, he's worried. A worried man makes mistakes, Victor said. Or he runs, Emma said. The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. She's right, Dante said. He was already moving toward the door. If Fitch decides the primary operation failed and Marco is compromised, he'll trigger whatever exit Marco built for him, Victor said, standing. And Fitch has spent 14 years building exits we don't know about. Emma stood too. His office. We have people. Your people will go to the lobby, Emma said. They'll call ahead, or they'll show up in a way that registers. Fitch will have a read on your standard approach. He's been watching it for 14 years. She paused. But he doesn't have a read on me. Victor looked at her. He has never once looked at me, Emma said. Not in 2 meetings. Not in 31 years of being in the same building. I am categorically invisible to a man like Gerald Fitch. Emma, I'm not suggesting I confront him, she said. I'm suggesting I go in first. Through the main entrance, which any member of the public can access. I go to his floor. I find out if he's still there or if he's already moving. I call you. Your people are already in position outside. Nobody tips anyone off. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when someone has just proposed something that is logical and also terrifying in equal measure. You're 62 years old, Dante said, not unkindly. I'm 62 years old, Emma agreed. I'm a black woman in a good coat carrying a tote bag. I am the single most overlooked category of human being in the lobby of a downtown Manhattan office building. She looked at Dante steadily. That is not a complaint. That is a tactical asset, and I need you to let me use it. Dante looked at Victor. Victor looked at Emma. If anything feels wrong, Victor said, you walk out. You don't wait. You don't assess, you walk. Understood. And you call me before you go in and you stay on the line. Understood. He held her gaze for one more beat. You came into this building this morning to dust furniture. I know, Emma said. Life is strange. Something moved at the corner of Victor Caruso's mouth, brief, almost invisible, the echo of a smile that had once belonged to a different version of him. Go, he said. Emma went. She took the elevator down, walked through the lobby and stepped into the city with her tote bag on her arm and Victor's number open on her phone and 31 years of knowing exactly how to move through a world that was not watching her. The air outside hit her face and she breathed it in sharp April cold, carrying the smell of the city that never fully went away under anything. And she walked. She called Victor when she was half a block from Fitch's building. "I'm going in." "I hear you," Victor said. "We're outside, north and south exits covered." She put one earbud in left ear, the phone call tucked into her jacket pocket, and walked through the main entrance of 440 Park, like a woman who had an appointment, which was to say like a woman who belonged there, which was the same thing. The lobby was marble and glass in the specific kind of hush that expensive buildings manufacture deliberately. She didn't stop at the security desk. She walked to the elevator bank pressed 32 and rode up in the company of two men in suits who looked at their phones and did not look at her once. The elevator opened onto a reception area. A young woman at the front desk looked up with the professional smile of someone whose job involved redirecting people who weren't supposed to be there. "Good morning," Emma said before the receptionist could speak. "I'm here to pick up some documents for Mr. Caruso. Mr. Victor Caruso. Mr. Fitch is expecting the courier." She set her tote bag on the desk with the quiet authority of someone who has been picking up documents for important people for a very long time. "I'll just let him know I've arrived, if that's all right." The receptionist hesitated, that specific half-second hesitation of someone caught between protocols, and in that hesitation, Emma scanned the visible space behind the reception desk. 3 offices along the corridor. The corner office at the far end door closed, a jacket hanging on the hook beside it that she could see through the glass panel. He was still here. "Of course," the receptionist said, reaching for the phone. "Let me just—" "No need," Emma said, pleasantly, already taking her tote bag back. "I can see he's occupied. I'll wait by the elevator. Don't disturb him on my account." She turned back toward the elevator bank. Her pulse was steady. She was mildly astonished by how steady it was. Into the phone very quietly. "He's here, corner office, still in." "Copy," Victor said. "Don't move." She stood by the elevator and waited. She counted the seconds. She was at 47 when she heard the corner office door open. Gerald Fitch walked out carrying a slim leather briefcase and wearing his coat. Not the jacket from the hook that was still there, still hanging, but a different coat, heavier, the kind you wear when you're not coming back. He was moving with the particular controlled urgency of a man who has decided to leave and is making himself walk slowly enough not to announce it. He looked toward the reception desk. He did not look toward the elevator bank. He said something brief to the receptionist. "Tell anyone who calls I'm in a meeting," and turned left toward the stairwell. "Stairwell," Emma said quietly. "He's taking the stairs. He's heading down." "Which side?" She was already moving, crossing the reception area at the same unhurried pace, watching Fitch's back disappear through the stairwell door. "North," she said. "I think north." "We have north," Victor said. Emma pushed through the stairwell door 8 seconds behind Gerald Fitch. She could hear him below her measured footsteps, not running, a man who understood that running on stairs made sound, and sound drew attention. She went down one landing and stopped listening, counting his steps, calculating his pace. "He's going to street level, or street level," she said. "We're ready." "Victor," she said it quietly, and something in the way she said it made him wait. "Fitch isn't running because he's scared. He's running because he has somewhere to be. A man who built exits over 14 years doesn't panic. He executes." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the exit isn't the end. It's the next step. Wherever he's going, whoever's waiting for him, that's where the real information is." A pause. "You think we should follow him?" "I think your people at the north exit should not intercept him," Emma said carefully. "I think they should follow him, and I think they should be good enough at it that a man who has spent 14 years studying how Victor Caruso operates does not see them coming." Another pause. Longer this time. "Dante," Victor said, not to her, to someone else on another line, and then there was a brief exchange she could only half hear, and then Victor came back. "Dante agrees with you." "Dante is a smart man," Emma said. "Don't tell him that. He already knows." Fitch's footsteps had reached the ground level. Miriam heard the heavy door open and close. She went down the last 2 flights and pushed through into the lobby, and through the glass frontage, she could see Gerald Fitch on the sidewalk, turning north, already absorbed into the foot traffic of a Tuesday morning in Manhattan, invisible in the way that men in expensive coats on Park Avenue are invisible, because they are exactly what the setting expects. She walked out. She stood on the sidewalk. She watched him walk. And two of the three people following Gerald Fitch that morning were trained professionals with years of field experience. The third was a 62-year-old housekeeper in a good coat with a tote bag who had spent 31 years learning to be invisible and was now using every single thing that invisibility had ever taught her. She followed him for 4 blocks. Fitch turned into a hotel on 53rd, not through the main entrance, but through the side door, the one that connected to the bar and the restaurant, and beyond those to the private meeting rooms on the mezzanine level. Emma went in through the main entrance, moved through the lobby without pausing, and positioned herself near the mezzanine staircase in time to see Fitch enter the second room from the left. "Mezzanine," she said. "Room 2. He's meeting someone. Can you see who?" She moved to the mezzanine level, slowly tote bag on her arm, moving through the hotel corridor like a woman looking for the ladies' room. The meeting room door was closed, but the glass panel beside it was not fully covered by the privacy shade. A narrow strip of visibility. Enough. She stopped near a house phone on the wall and faced away from the door, watching the panel's reflection in the mirror of a decorative frame on the opposite wall. She had learned this trick in the penthouse, the art of seeing what was behind you by watching what was in front. 2 men inside, Fitch and someone else. Older, heavier. The specific settled posture of a man who was accustomed to rooms like this, to conversations like this, to being the person that other people came to. Emma did not recognize the face, but she registered it with complete precision: the age, the build, the color of the hair, the ring on the left hand, the way the man sat with both hands flat on the table, like someone who had been told once that it projected authority and had practiced it so long it had become natural. "Victor," she said very quietly into the phone. "The man in the room with Fitch. I'm going to describe him. I need you to tell me if you know him." She described him, every detail in the careful, complete way she cataloged the things she observed, the way she had been doing it in one form or another for 31 years. The silence on Victor's end lasted 4 full seconds. "That's Dominic Falcone," Victor said. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped into very still water. "The head of the family," she said. Not a question. "He's supposed to be in Miami," Victor said, and his voice had gone to that place, the oldest, coldest place underneath everything else. "He's been in Miami for 2 months. We confirmed it last week." "He's not in Miami," Emma said. No, Victor said. "He's not." And Emma understood, standing in a hotel corridor with a house phone beside her and a tote bag on her arm, what she was looking at. Not the aftermath of a failed plan, not a scramble. This was the real meeting, the one that Rick and Marco and the secondary team and the East Wing contractors had all been designed to make possible. Remove Victor, remove the other 3, create the vacuum. And then Dominic Falcone, supposedly in Miami, supposedly uninvolved, would be already in New York, already in the room, already positioned to receive whatever the vacuum produced. "He planned to be here today," Emma said. "Win or lose on your end. He's here to either receive the city or manage the failure. He's the contingency Victor. He's the last piece." She heard Victor exhale. It was the exhale of a man who has just seen the full board for the first time. "Can you get out of that corridor without being seen?" he asked. "Yes." "Then get out, right now. Walk out of the building and go to the black car on 53rd West Side. Dante is in it." "And Falcone," Victor said, "is my problem. He has been my problem for 11 years. Today, finally, he is my problem, with evidence, witnesses, and a paper trail connecting him to a conspiracy on American soil." A pause. "That's a different kind of problem than the kind he's prepared for." Emma walked out of the corridor. She took the main staircase down, crossed the lobby, and pushed through the glass doors into the April air. The black car was where Victor said it would be. Dante was in the front seat. He leaned over and opened the rear door without a word, and she got in. "Falcone," Dante said. "Falcone, She agreed. "You found him." "He was in the room." Dante was quiet for a moment. Then, "Victor's been trying to get direct evidence on Dominic Falcone for 6 years. Emma sat with that. 6 years. And it had taken a housekeeper with a tote bag and 31 years of knowing how to stand in a corridor without drawing attention to walk into a hotel and see what 6 years of professional intelligence had not managed to find. She wasn't sure whether to feel proud of that or troubled by it. She decided after a moment to simply feel it as the truth it was. Some things were found by the people who were supposed to find them, and some things were found by the person who happened to be standing in the right place at the right angle, looking in the right direction because they had spent their entire life learning to look without being seen. Victor arrived 40 minutes later. She didn't ask what happened in those 40 minutes. She had decided on the ride over that there were still limits to what she needed to know, not the limits of fear, not the old limits of survival, but the limits of a woman who understood her own role with more clarity than she'd had that morning. She had found the information. What was done with it was not her work. When Victor got into the car, he sat beside her and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. The car moved through midday Manhattan traffic, and the city did what the city always did, indifferent, continuous swallowing every earthquake with the same appetite it gave to everything else. Falcone is no longer a problem, Victor said finally. His family knows what he was doing. They also know it failed. In my world, Emma, a plan that fails completely does not get a second attempt. He looked at her. It's over. She absorbed that. Fitch, federal custody within the hour. We gave the evidence to people who are very motivated to use it. Fitch will talk. Men like Fitch always talk. And Marco, Victor was quiet for a moment. Marco told me what I needed to know. His daughter in Naples is not going to grow up without a father. He said it without elaborating, and she did not ask him to. Rick's daughter, Emma said, home by this evening. I gave you my word on that this morning. I know. The car stopped at a red light. On the sidewalk outside, a woman about Emma's age was walking a small dog, talking on her phone, completely absorbed in whatever ordinary thing her Tuesday had brought her. Emma watched her for the 3 seconds the light held and felt something she couldn't name. Not envy, not exactly, but the awareness of the distance between that woman's morning and her own. I need to water my orchid, Emma said. Dante in the front seat made a sound that might have been a laugh. You can't go back to your apartment, Victor said. Not yet. A few days until we've confirmed the network is fully closed. I know. I have a property in... I'm not staying in one of your properties, Emma said. I'll stay with my sister in the Bronx. Victor looked at her. You have a sister. Lorraine, she's 65, she's retired. She makes the best rice and peas in the 5 boroughs, and she has been asking me to visit for 4 months. Emma folded her hands in her lap. She's going to ask me why I'm coming, and I'm going to tell her I needed a few days off, and she's going to ask from what, and I'm going to say housekeeping, and she is going to make me a plate of food and not ask anything else. Victor looked at her for a long moment. That sounds like exactly what you need. Yes, Emma said, it is. They rode in silence for another block. Then Victor said, I meant what I said this morning about your role. I know you did. When you were ready to talk about what that looks like, I'll come find you, Emma said. I know where your office is. I've been cleaning it for 31 years. Something genuine moved across Victor Caruso's face, unhurried, unguarded, the expression of a man briefly released from the weight of being what he was. It lasted only a moment. Then it was gone, replaced by the controlled neutrality she knew so well, and the city moved past the car windows in the morning, which had started with orchids in a lint brush, in the specific particular silence of a penthouse before its occupant woke, finally fully exhaled. That evening at a table in the Bronx with Lorraine's rice and peas in front of her and the television murmuring in the other room, Emma Hayes sat and let the day catch up with her. It came in waves, the fear, the adrenaline, the particular texture of Victor's face when Dante said Anthony's name, the way Gerald Fitch's coat had looked on a man who thought he was disappearing, the strip of mirror reflection that had shown her Dominic Falcone's hands flat on a table in a hotel meeting room. Lorraine put a second helping on her plate without being asked. You look like you had a day, Lorraine said. I had a day, Emma agreed. Work. Work. Lorraine sat down across from her with her own plate and looked at her sister with the particular accurate vision of someone who has known you for 62 years and does not need the full story to read the outline of it. You all right? She asked. Emma picked up her fork. She thought about the question the way she thought about all the important questions, now honestly without Washington pulling up the accurate answer from wherever it actually lived. Yes, she said, and she meant it. Not the easy yes of a person reassuring someone who loves them. The harder yes, the true one. The yes of a woman who had walked into a building that morning as furniture and walked out of it as something else entirely. Not because the world had changed its mind about her, but because she had finally irrevocably changed her mind about herself. She had spent 31 years believing that being invisible was the price of surviving in a world that was not built for her. And then one Tuesday morning, and in the space between adjusting a silk tie and opening her mouth, she had discovered the thing her mother had been trying to tell her all along. Invisibility was not a cage, it was a skill. And the woman who possessed it quietly, completely, without anyone in any room ever understanding what they were standing next to, had never once been furniture. She had always been the most dangerous person in the room. She just hadn't known it yet. Now she did. And that, from this morning forward, made all the difference.